Right now, there's a woman thinking about you, but not in the way you want. She's thinking about how predictable you are, how easy you are to read, how you react exactly the way every other man reacts. What she doesn't know is that you're about to discover the 5 psychological rules that will completely reverse this dynamic. These aren't pickup lines or manipulation tactics. These are deep psychological principles that Carl Jung discovered about the human psyche. Principles that will make her question everything she thought she knew about attraction, desire, and power. If you're tired of being just another forgettable guy in her rotation, if you want to become the man she can't stop thinking about, smash that subscribe button right now. Because what you're about to learn will fundamentally rewire how women perceive and respond to you. Carl Jung spent his entire career studying what he called the collective unconscious, the deep psychological patterns that drive human behavior below the level of conscious awareness. What he discovered about attraction between masculine and feminine energies will shock you. Every woman you've ever wanted has been unconsciously following psychological scripts that are thousands of years old, scripts that determine who she desires and who she dismisses. Most men are completely unconscious of these patterns. They think attraction is about looks, money, or being nice. They have no idea that every interaction with a woman is actually a complex psychological dance, where she's constantly testing for specific masculine qualities that signal genetic fitness and psychological strength. They react emotionally to her tests. They try to logic their way into her heart. They become needy and desperate when she pulls away. But the man who understands Jung's insights into the anima and animus, the masculine and feminine aspects, within every psyche, he operates on a completely different level. He sees the psychological forces at play beneath her words and actions. He understands that her attraction isn't really about him at all. It's about whether he can embody the archetypal masculine energy her unconscious mind is desperately seeking. And here's what will blow your mind. The women who seem most difficult, most impossible to please, are actually giving you the clearest roadmap to their psychological surrender. Let me show you exactly what I mean. Jung discovered that every woman carries within her psyche what he called the animus, her inner masculine aspect. This animus creates her standards for what constitutes attractive masculine energy. But here's the crucial insight. Her animus is also her weakness. When she encounters a man who embodies the psychological qualities her animus recognizes as superior, she experiences what Jung called psychological possession, an overwhelming compulsion to submit to and unite with that masculine energy. The first psychological rule that triggers this response is, become psychologically unpredictable while remaining emotionally stable. Most men are either completely predictable, boring, or emotionally unstable, chaotic. But the man who can be surprising in his thoughts and actions while maintaining perfect emotional equilibrium becomes absolutely fascinating to the feminine psyche. When you're predictable, her mind categorizes you as safe but unexciting. When you're emotionally unstable, she categorizes you as exciting but dangerous. But when you combine unpredictability with stability, you create what Jung called a transcendent function. You embody seemingly contradictory qualities that her psyche can't easily categorize. This creates psychological tension, and psychological tension creates obsession. Think about the men women can't stop talking about. They're never the nice guys who are always available and always agreeable. They're the men who surprise her with unexpected depth, who challenge her assumptions, who keep her guessing about their next move. But crucially, they do this from a place of centered masculine strength, not chaotic emotional reactivity. When you master this balance, something profound happens in her unconscious mind. She begins to perceive you as what Jung called a numinous figure, someone who carries archetypal power that transcends ordinary social dynamics. You become not just attractive, but psychologically necessary to her sense of completeness. The second psychological rule builds on this foundation. Master the art of strategic withdrawal. Jung observed that the feminine psyche is naturally expansive and relationship-seeking, while the masculine psyche is naturally focused and independence-oriented. Most men try to match her relationship energy, becoming clingy and available whenever. She wants attention. This is psychological suicide. The high-value man understands that his attention and energy are finite resources that become more valuable through scarcity. When she's used to having unlimited access to your time, thoughts, and emotional energy, she begins to take you for granted. But when you strategically withdraw that access, her psyche experiences what Jung called psychological hunger, a desperate need to regain the connection she's lost. This isn't about playing games or being cruel. It's about understanding that desire requires distance, that attraction requires mystery, that value requires scarcity. When you're always available, you're communicating that you have nothing more important in your life than her attention. When you strategically withdraw, you're communicating that you have a rich inner world and important purposes that don't revolve around her. But here's where most men completely destroy their chances. They withdraw out of anger or punishment instead of strength and purpose. Let me show you the difference, because this distinction will determine whether she begs for you or blocks you. Strategic withdrawal comes from abundance, not scarcity. You're not pulling away because you're hurt or trying to make her jealous. You're pulling away because you have genuine interests, goals, and relationships that require your attention. You're not trying to punish her. You're simply prioritizing your own psychological and spiritual development over her emotional fluctuations. When withdrawal comes from this place of authentic purpose, her unconscious mind recognizes it as legitimate masculine behavior. She may test you initially, trying to pull you back into her emotional world through drama or manipulation. But when you remain unmoved, when you continue focusing on your own development, regardless of her reactions, something clicks in her psyche. She begins to see you as what Jung called individuated, a person who has achieved psychological wholeness and doesn't need external validation to feel complete. This is incredibly rare and incredibly attractive to feminine energy, which is constantly seeking to unite with complete masculine energy. The third psychological rule reveals why some men become absolutely irresistible while others remain forgettable. Embody psychological authority without seeking permission. Jung wrote extensively about what he called psychological types, and observed that certain personalities naturally command respect and attention, while others naturally defer and submit. The difference isn't about aggression or dominance in the crude sense. It's about psychological positioning. The high-value man operates from what Jung called self-authority. He trusts his own perceptions, makes decisions based on his own values, and doesn't seek external validation for his choices. He doesn't ask permission to be himself. Most men constantly seek approval from women. They ask permission through their body language, their tentative suggestions, their need for her to validate their attractiveness or worth. Every time you seek her approval, you're unconsciously positioning yourself as psychologically subordinate to her. You're asking her to be the authority on your own value. But when you operate from genuine self-authority, when you make decisions and take actions based on your own internal compass rather than her reactions, you trigger something primal in her unconscious mind. She begins to perceive you as what Jung called an archetypal authority figure, someone who has the psychological strength to lead rather than follow. This doesn't mean being domineering or controlling. It means being so Secure in your own psychological framework that you don't need her agreement to feel confident in your choices. When she senses this level of self-possession, her natural feminine instinct is to test whether your authority is real or just an act. And this is where it gets really interesting, because her tests aren't trying to tear you down. They're trying to confirm that you're as psychologically powerful as you appear. Once she confirms your authority is genuine, her behavior toward you will shift dramatically. The fourth psychological rule is perhaps the most counterintuitive. Become comfortable with her discomfort. Jung discovered that growth requires what he called psychological tension, the uncomfortable space between who we are and who we're becoming. Most men try to eliminate this tension in their relationships by constantly reassuring women, fixing their problems, or avoiding any interaction that might create emotional discomfort. This is exactly backwards. The feminine psyche actually craves psychological tension because it signals that she's in the presence of masculine energy strong enough to challenge her growth. When you're comfortable with her discomfort, when you don't rush to rescue her from her own emotional processes, you demonstrate a level of masculine maturity that most men never achieve. Think about it. Every woman has been trained by weak, masculine energy to expect that her emotions will control male behavior. When she's upset, men try to fix it. When she's anxious, men try to reassure her. When she's confused, men try to provide answers. But this actually prevents her from developing her own psychological strength and independence. The high-value man understands that sometimes the most loving thing he can do is allow her to work through her own psychological processes without interference. He doesn't try to rescue her from discomfort because he understands that discomfort is often the catalyst for growth and self-discovery. When you can remain calm and centered while she's experiencing emotional turbulence, when you can offer support without trying to control her experience, you demonstrate what Jung called psychological holding, the ability to create a safe container for someone else's growth without losing your own center. This kind of masculine presence is incredibly rare in today's world, and women respond to it with profound appreciation and attraction. She may not consciously understand why your ability to remain steady during her storms makes her feel so drawn to you, but her unconscious mind recognizes that you possess the psychological strength she's been seeking. But here's what separates the men who truly master this from those who just think they understand. It's not about being cold or indifferent to her struggles. It's about something much more sophisticated. The fifth and final psychological rule synthesizes everything we've discussed. Develop what Jung called active imagination in your relationships. This means consciously participating in the unconscious, psychological dynamics that normally operate below the level of awareness. Most people are completely unconscious participants in their own relationship patterns, reacting automatically to triggers and falling into the same cycles over and over again. But when you develop active imagination, you become conscious of the archetypal forces at play in every interaction. You can see when she's testing your strength, when she's seeking reassurance, when she's projecting her own fears onto you, when she's trying to pull you into codependent patterns. Instead of reacting unconsciously, you respond consciously from a place of psychological understanding. This level of awareness allows you to navigate relationship dynamics with the skill of a master psychologist. You're not manipulating or controlling. You're simply operating from such a deep understanding of human psychology that you can respond appropriately to whatever psychological energy she's expressing. For example, when she's being difficult or challenging, instead of getting defensive or trying to argue with her logic, you recognize that she's unconsciously testing whether you're strong enough to maintain your center under pressure. Your response isn't emotional. It's strategic and psychologically informed. When she's pulling away or creating distance, instead of chasing or becoming needy, you understand that she's likely processing her own psychological material and needs space to integrate new aspects of herself. Your response demonstrates trust in her process and confidence in your own value. When she's being affectionate and open, instead of becoming clingy or taking it for granted, you receive her energy gracefully, while maintaining your own psychological independence. You appreciate her openness without becoming dependent on it for your own sense of worth. This level of psychological sophistication creates what Jung called mutual individuation, a relationship dynamic where both people are supporting each other's psychological development rather than trying to complete themselves through the other person. This is the holy grail of conscious relationships, and it's only possible when at least one person, hopefully you, is operating from this level of awareness. When you can hold this kind of psychological space in a relationship, something magical happens. She begins to feel safe enough to explore aspects of herself that she's never shared with anyone else. She starts to trust that you won't try to fix or change her, that you won't be threatened by her complexity, that you can handle whatever psychological material she brings to the relationship. This creates a level of intimacy that goes far beyond physical attraction or emotional neediness. It's psychological intimacy, the sense that she can be completely herself with you without fear of judgment or abandonment. This is what women are really seeking when they talk about wanting to feel seen and understood by a man. But this kind of intimacy is only possible when you've done your own psychological work. You can't hold space for her psychological complexity if you're still unconscious of your own psychological patterns. You can't remain centered during her emotional storms if you haven't learned to navigate your own emotional landscape. This is why Jung insisted that the path to healthy relationships begins with what he called individuation, the process of becoming a psychologically whole and conscious individual. Most people try to find completion through relationships without ever doing the inner work to become complete within themselves. And this brings us to the most powerful realization of all, one that completely changes how you approach every interaction with women from this moment forward. The men who truly master these psychological principles don't just become more attractive to women, they become magnetic to high-quality feminine energy while naturally repelling low-quality attention. They develop what Jung called psychological discernment, the ability to quickly recognize which women are capable of conscious relationship and which are still operating from unconscious patterns. When you operate from this level of psychological development, you stop attracting women who are looking for someone to fix their problems, validate their worth, or complete their identity. Instead, you attract women who are also committed to their own growth and development, women who recognize and appreciate conscious masculine energy when they encounter it. This completely transforms your relationship experience. Instead of dealing with drama, manipulation, and emotional chaos, you find yourself in relationships characterized by mutual respect, genuine intimacy, and collaborative growth. Instead of feeling drained by women's emotional demands, you feel energized by the conscious feminine energy that naturally gravitates toward your psychological maturity. But this transformation requires a fundamental shift in how you think about relationships. You have to stop seeing women as prizes to be won or problems to be solved, and start seeing them as complex psychological beings on their own journey of development. You have to stop trying to get something from them and start offering something valuable to them. The 5 psychological rules we've discussed aren't techniques for manipulating women into wanting you. They're the natural behavioral expressions of a man who has done the inner work to become psychologically mature and emotionally sovereign. When you embody these qualities authentically, attraction becomes effortless because you're operating from the kind of integrated masculine energy that feminine energy naturally seeks to unite with. This is what Jung meant when he wrote about the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing psychological forces in creative tension rather than being torn apart by internal contradictions. The psychologically mature man can be both strong and gentle, both independent and connected, both challenging and supportive. He doesn't have to choose between being nice or being attractive because he's integrated both qualities into a coherent whole. Women find this kind of psychological integration irresistible because it mirrors the complexity of their own inner landscape. The feminine psyche is naturally paradoxical. She wants security and excitement, predictability and surprise, closeness and independence. The man who can navigate these paradoxes with understanding and grace becomes incredibly valuable to her unconscious mind. But mastering these psychological principles requires more than just intellectual understanding. It requires what Jung called lived experience, the willingness to practice these concepts in real relationships and learn from both your successes and failures. You can't become psychologically sophisticated by reading about it or watching videos. You have to apply these insights in actual interactions with women and observe how they respond. This is where most men give up. They want a quick fix, a simple formula they can apply to get immediate results. But psychological development is a lifelong process that requires patience, commitment, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about yourself and your patterns. The men who persist, who commit to ongoing psychological growth and self-examination, discover something profound. They don't just become more successful with women, they become more successful in every area of life. The same psychological principles that make you attractive to high-quality feminine energy also make you more effective in business, more respected by other men, more capable of leadership and influence in any social context. This is because attraction isn't really about gender dynamics, it's about psychological health and maturity. People are naturally drawn to individuals who are psychologically whole, emotionally stable, and operating from a place of authentic power rather than unconscious neediness. When you develop these qualities, you don't have to try to be attractive. You simply are attractive because you're expressing the kind of integrated human energy that everyone unconsciously recognizes as valuable and rare. You become what Jung called an individuated person, someone who has done the work to become consciously whole rather than unconsciously fragmented. This kind of psychological development transforms not just your relationships, but your entire life experience. You stop being reactive to external circumstances and start being creative in response to whatever life presents. You stop seeking validation from others and start validating yourself from an internal sense of worth and purpose. Most importantly, you stop trying to get love and start giving love from a place of overflow rather than emptiness. This completely changes the energy you bring to relationships and explains why psychologically mature men don't have to chase women. Women naturally gravitate toward the kind of conscious masculine energy they represent. The journey from unconscious reactivity to conscious response, from needy boy to integrated man, from psychological fragmentation to wholeness. This is the path Jung outlined for anyone serious about psychological development. It's not an easy path, but it's the only path that leads to genuine fulfillment and authentic relationships. Most men spend their entire lives unconsciously reacting to women's behavior, never realizing that they have the power to consciously create the kind of relationship dynamics they desire. They remain victims of their own unconscious patterns, wondering why they keep attracting the same types of problems and experiencing the same relationship failures over and over again. But once you understand the psychological principles we've discussed today, once you commit to developing genuine psychological maturity rather than just learning surface-level techniques, everything changes. You stop being at the mercy of other people's emotional states and start operating from your own centered masculine presence. You stop taking women's behavior personally because you understand the unconscious psychological forces that drive their actions. You stop trying to change or fix women because you understand that everyone is on their own journey of psychological development. You stop seeking completion through relationships because you've learned to find wholeness within yourself. This doesn't mean becoming cold or disconnected. It means becoming so psychologically secure that you can offer genuine warmth and connection without losing yourself in the process. It means being able to love deeply without becoming attached to specific outcomes. It means being able to commit fully while maintaining your psychological independence. The 5 psychological rules we've explored today are just the beginning of this journey. They're entry-level concepts for men who are ready to stop being unconscious and start taking responsibility for their own psychological development. But true mastery requires going much deeper into the study of human psychology, shadow work, and the integration of opposing psychological forces. If you're serious about this path, if you want to become the kind of man that high-quality women naturally desire and respect, then you need to commit to ongoing study and inner work. Read Jung's collected works. Study the psychological principles that govern human attraction and relationships, and most importantly, begin the challenging but rewarding process of examining your own unconscious patterns and motivations. The transformation from average man to psychologically sophisticated master of human dynamics begins with a single decision. The decision to stop being unconscious and start taking control of your own psychological development. If you're ready to discover the advanced psychological principles that make women psychologically surrender to your presence, if you want to learn how to become so magnetically attractive that she'll beg for your attention, then click on this. Next video, ela vai implorar por você se você dominar essas 5 regras psicológicas. Your psychological transformation starts now.